Okay, this is our first video on statistics. Now, let's do a little intro on what statistics are. As you can see, I put two quotes on here. The first one is dealing with numerical data, and the second is collecting and analyzing large amounts of numbers. So in general, if we're looking at data, and data really is just a set of numbers that could have any sort of context, but when we deal with large sets of numbers, how do we deal with that numbers? How can we make conclusions? How can we break it down, analyze it? That whole category of mathematics is called statistics. So in this unit, that's what we're going to be focusing on. So the purpose of this video is to highlight two things. One is the different types of centers of a type of certain set of data, and secondly, different diagrams and visuals to view that set of data. So those are the two main objectives. So what we're going to have is a running problem throughout this entire unit. And the set of data we're going to look at here is the height of students in a class. So here we have 24 students. You can see them outlined here in black, just a student number, and then we record the height of each student in inches. Okay, so obviously someone that's 60 inches tall is 5 feet, someone that's 72 inches tall is 6 feet. So we just recorded the heights of 24 different students and put them into a chart. Okay, so here we have a large set of data. So now we have to be able to analyze it and break it down. And notice this set of data is pretty hard to look at, because all the heights just jump around. We go from 60 to 67, back down to 65. So it's very hard to just even visualize what this data has, what type of tendencies, what's the high, what's the low. So the first thing we want to do is reorganize the data into a list. So you can see right up here, I put all 24 heights in numerical order, starting with the lowest and going to the highest. So the shortest person in the class is 58 inches tall, whereas the tallest person in the class is 80 inches tall, okay? And then everyone in between. And obviously you can see we have several students at the same height. For instance, we have two students that are both 65 inches tall, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is organize that. So now what we're going to do is break down this data and we're finding the measure of centers. So if I say, okay, what's the center of the data? Well, there's three different types of centers, and they are the mean, median, and mode, okay? And underneath it I have kind of like the abbreviated form, another way to say it. So a lot of times when we talk about define the average, we refer to that as the mean. And again, to find the mean, what we're looking at is the sum of all the bits of data, okay, divided by the number of pieces of data. So in this case, if I was to add up all these pieces up here into my calculator, I'm going to get 1,616, okay? And there is 24 students. So I'm going to divide by 24 students. And if I put that into my calculator, we're going to get that to equal 67.3 repeating inches tall. So we would say that the average student is 67 inches tall, okay? And we refer to that to the mean. So that's what we typically call the average. Now there's two other types of centers. One is called the median. So the median is what is the value that is in the middle of the data. So if you were to literally line all these students up from shortest to tallest and say what student is in the middle, that's the median. So in this case we have 24 students. In the middle would be 12 students in. So let's kind of count that. I'll do it here in red here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So there's 12 right there. And then over here, obviously, we have, I just want to check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now, obviously, if you had an odd number of students, you would have a number, a single person that would be standing in the middle. Now, here we have 12 to one side and 12 to the other. So what we're going to do in order to find the median is we're going to find the mean or the average of those two middle students. So if we add up those two students, again, finding the average is you find the sum divided by the number of students, and we're going to get 66.5. So we could say that the middle height, the median, is 66.5. Now clearly we can see that it's different than the mean. So not that all the centers have to be the same. It depends on how we look at it. And they're naturally going to be different. Okay. Now mode is what number or height, um, oh, get my eraser going on here. Hold on one second. Okay, students, I had to change the format on my screen there, just a couple technical issues. So now let's talk about mode. So mode is what happens most often. So let's kind of look for repeats. Here we can see that 60 is repeated 3 times. 64 is repeated twice. 65 is repeated twice. 66 is repeated 4 times. 67 twice. 73 times. 72 twice. And 73 twice. So we have a lot of things that are repeated multiple times. Well, which one is repeated the most often? And we can see right here 66. So 66 is repeated most often. So we say that as the highest level of frequency. Frequency is, how many times does it repeat? So here we can see, again, 3 different centers. They're all near each other, but they're spelling out 3 different things. Now let's take a look at different ways to represent this data into some sort of visual. So the first one we're going to look at is a dot plot. Now a dot plot is you show almost like a number line. So down here we have inches starting from 50 to 80. And notice what we have here is a dot represents every student. And this is a great thing that shows frequency. You want to see, okay, we can see right here that 66 was repeated 4 times, and we can see that right here. Whereas we could see that 65 was repeated twice and so forth. Now, one thing that might be good to add to this set of data is maybe a little bit more numbers on the bottom, so we know what these numbers are. So here we could actually maybe put in 66, 64, 68, and so forth, and we can kind of see that data. And obviously we have 72, 74. So a little bit better visual of understanding what's going on. But here we can see that, like, the mode is the best thing to see. We can see that there's 3 students at 60 inches tall. So this is really good when we're looking at like smaller sets of data. If we want to look at individual people, a dot plot is a good way to do that. Now let's go ahead and look at the next chart. This is called a box plot. A lot of times we refer to it as a box whisker. So obviously you can visually see here's a box, and then we have these 2 whiskers on the end. Now what this visual does is it represents the data into things called quartiles. So if we took these 24 students and put them into 4 groups, into quarters. So let's take 24 students, divide by 4, and that means that each group will have 6 students. So we're going to kind of highlight those. So we're going to go 2, 4, 6 students go right here. That's 1 quartile. And then we have another 6 students. And notice we get now to the median, so now we're at the middle. Then we're going to do another 6 students. And then obviously the last 6 students. Okay. So we would say that this is the first quartile, the second quartile, the third quartile, and the fourth quartile. And we can kind of see the different pieces. So now that we have the groups separated into quarters, let's go ahead and label the key divisions of these groups. So if we talk here, we would understand that this value right here is the median. And we define that in the last screen. Now if you look at the lower half, these 2 groups here, and we found the median of these 2 groups, that would be right here. So that's in between the first group and the second group. We call that position quartile 1. And then likewise over here, if we look at this group, what's the middle of the upper group? We call that quartile 3. So let's kind of highlight these groups so we can kind of visually see it. So looking down here, if you look at the lower 2 groups, the middle, the median of that is quartile 1. And if we look at the upper 2 groups, the median of those groups is quartile 3. Then obviously the middle of all the data is the median. So we can kind of now see where do those show up on the graph. Well, the median is always shown right here, and that is the middle of the box. You can see that line right here. And then the quartile 3 between 70 and 72 is right here at 71, and that's that value right here. And then this quartile 1, which is the average between 64 and 65, is 64.5, we can see right there. So the ends of the box are the quartile 1, and the quartile 3. And I'll see the middle of the box is the median. Okay, now a lot of people say, well, how come this is not in the middle? Each piece of this graph represents 25% of the students. So this is the lower group of students. This is that middle group right here. This is the middle group right here. And then um, this group over here from 72 to 80 is this represented by this line. So a box whisker is a great graph that shows ranges of numbers. So we can kind of see how the numbers are spread out. And obviously they group up here in the middle. So again, the first group of students, second group of students, third group of students, and the fourth group of students. And we define it by here's the minimum. This is the shortest person, the max, the tallest person, and then the median, and then obviously quartile 1 and quartile 3. So a good visual to kind of look at what the data looks like as you spread it out. Okay, and we refer to that as kind of like the spread. Now our next graph is called a histogram. Now, instead of putting all these students as individual points, we put them into groups, categories. You say, okay, how many students are in between 55 and 60? So in that group, we can see that there's only one student. So there, that one student is. Then in the next group, let's go from 60 like up to 64, for instance. And we could see that there is 5 of those students, and we could see them right here. So those 5 students are represented in that group there. And then from 65 to 69, well, let's kind of identify that. This large group, we can see 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 students, and they're represented here. And now see 70 to 74, we have another 2, 4, 6, 8 students. And then I see only one student in this upper category over here. Okay. So there we can see groups of students. Okay, so this is great for larger sets of data. You know, if you had several hundred students, you don't want to look at all these different dots. You want to see them as categories. So we call this a histogram. If you were to separate it, it would actually be a bar graph, and we'll kind of show that. So this is a great thing to show kind of where larger groups are, different tendencies, and we can kind of see where the centers would lie. Obviously, the centers would lie somewhere in this portion of the graph. Okay, so let's take a look at this next slide. It kind of compares all 3 graphs. So again, here's the same set of data, and then we have all 3 visuals. We have the dot plot, the box plot, and the histogram. Now I threw this last one down here. This is the bar graph. This is like a histogram and a dot plot mixed together. So this shows frequency, but it's, again, hard to read like groups of students, whereas the histogram does that better. And we'll see that with different trends and different spreads and so forth. But, you know, if you want to look at individual frequency, dot plot is a good way to look. If you want to look at how the quartiles are listed in the different centers, you look at this portion right here. And then the histogram shows groups of students. So depending on what you want to look at with students depends on what type of graph you want to look at. So this, again, this video is just introductory to statistics, and again, different visuals of how to look at statistics and different ways to find center.